Some of the Chicago Bears' biggest disappointments and failures against the Green Bay Packers in Week 1 came from some of Ryan Poles' biggest acquisitions as a general manager. It doesn't mean those players are doomed, but it really wasn't a good start.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can also follow Locked On Bears on Instagram. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. On the show today, we go back through what we learned from going back through this Bears-Packers Week 1 debacle. And the theme that emerged for me was how much of the struggles came from the biggest acquisitions on the Chicago Bears. Some of that to be expected, a bunch of new players in their first games with the Chicago Bears, but some of it also reflecting poorly on the general manager to start, that, the guys that they were counting on to be big difference makers this year were not those difference makers just yet. We'll start on offense with a couple of key offensive linemen, plus a couple of key weapons on the outside, not performing the way the Bears needed them to. We'll turn our attention to the defense, where a couple of key defensive linemen and some big free agent signings underwhelmed a bit in this game. But we'll wrap up with the Ryan Pace moves that did seem to do well and are trending in the right direction. The draft picks, not only this year's rookies, but also many of last year's picks that did play, showing some positive growth and signs of improvement in that area. I think the player across the board that I was most disappointed from in this game, it's a couple guys, but on the offensive line, I think that's where the disappointment was for me. And Lucas Patrick and Nate Davis were pretty miserable there. When you go back through and try and assign offensive line blame, certainly across the board, there were struggles. No one is immune from it. You can't sit here and say, oh, this one guy was great, but the other four were terrible. No, they were all bad. But I think it was actually the interior three of Whitehair, Lucas Patrick, and Nate Davis that were the most troublesome. I think that's where you saw Fields have the most trouble with. It's like sometimes when Braxton Jones or Darnell Wright would get beat, it was easier for Justin Fields to kind of scramble and escape those plays. But when it was Kenny Clark and Devontae Wyatt and guys coming up the middle at Fields, those were some of the biggest problems. And certainly I think the PFF numbers of pressures at least start to back some of that up. Nate Davis in this game was credited with 9 quarterback pressures. That was tied for the most of any offensive lineman on any team in Week 1. Last season, the Bears did not have any players have any games with a total of 9 pressures in them. Sure, on the higher end, you get 5, 6, maybe even 7. The Bears did not have anybody with 9. I don't think they had anyone with 8 either last year, if I remember correctly, going through everybody's games. This was individually one of the worst pass blocking performances that we've seen from a Bears offensive lineman in the last couple of seasons. Nate Davis was brought in to be one of the, cornerstones, if not at least one of the solid, solidifying forces on this offensive line. Not a Pro Bowl caliber guy, but someone you thought would plug in, be reliable. You know what you're going to get, snap in and snap out. You don't have to worry about him at right guard. One game does not mean he's going to be terrible for the entire season, but it was not a good start. And perhaps there's some real reason there with him not practicing much at all throughout training camp and the preseason, and being particularly rusty entering this game. I thought in particular where he struggled, it was sort of like the chemistry and awareness with his teammates. It's like when Darnell Wright needs his help to the inside, he's looking to his left to Lucas Patrick and not paying attention to Wright and letting pressure in on that side, or vice versa. When the pressure is coming off his left side and Lucas Patrick is kind of redirecting a guy to him so he can pick up somebody else, Nate Davis is looking to his right over by Darnell Wright and not blocking anybody. Like, a lot of it was mental in that regard. There were some plays where he's just beat quickly off the line of scrimmage or whatever, but it was rough, especially I think as you got later into the game, it got worse. So I wonder if maybe the effort and determination went down a little bit as the lead on the scoreboard, or I guess the deficit from the Bears' perspective went up, but he was pretty bad in terms of pass protection. A little better in the running game, but pass pro was horrible from him. Lucas Patrick too. At least with Lucas, we knew what he would be a little bit more coming into the season. We knew this was kind of what he was last season. But still, the Bears signed him 2 years ago to be their center. They talked him up as the leader of this offensive line. I know the circumstances have changed since then, but he was supposed to be a big addition for this group last year. He was supposed to be valuable depth coming off the bench, and looks like a guy who doesn't belong in the starting lineup at this point, that you would consider moving Cody Whitehair back to center because he struggled at left guard too, and getting maybe Ja'Tyre Carter or somebody else, Dan Feeney, in the starting lineup on the offensive line. How about another huge one, though? Chase Claypool. What are you doing? If you go back and watch Chase Claypool in that game, first of all, the blocking in the running game and on the screen games, horrendous. Low effort, low physicality, poor technique. A few of those screen plays and a few of those run plays that were blown up were directly because Chase Claypool did not block his guy. And it looked like an effort thing more than like a just like doesn't know what he's doing or bad at what he's doing kind of thing. And plus, some routes he wasn't finishing, hustling all the way. I mean, this was really, really a bad look for Chase Claypool. For a guy that was getting all the preseason hype, disastrous. Like, looks like a guy who should not be playing, should be a healthy scratch if he keeps playing like this, because there was just not anything close to the hits principle at all. Like, that's not what you need from Chase Claypool. It was really, really disappointing in what we saw from him. Mike Renner tweeted out a nice montage of them on Twitter if you want to go check that out to see it for yourself from the All-22 clips there for him. Still, some of the blame also belongs on defense with some of the big acquisitions, some worse than others, but still, it's like guys the Bears are counting on to come in this season and play big roles, not so far stepping up and playing that spot, and it doesn't look like a good start for the general manager's biggest move this offseason. We'll turn our attention to the defensive line, and we got to have the tough talk about the linebackers next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. It's the best way to get started in this NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because if you've never bet with FanDuel, now's the time to do it. Because if you're a new customer, all you have to do is bet $5 on anything, and they will give you $200 in bonus bets automatically, guaranteed. You don't have to win your bet. You don't have to lose your bet. You just have to place $5 in a bet, and they'll give you $200 more to bet with. It's great. I mean, you cannot find a better offer than this right now. Plus, all customers who make that $5 bet will also get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV, so you can even get a better deal on watching the games that you ultimately end up betting on. FanDuel app is great. It's easy to use. You can bet on everything from spreads to player props and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with this offer that you won't want to miss. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. The offensive line, obviously a big disappointment. But, Lucas Patrick and Nate Davis weren't necessarily the biggest free agent signings of the year by Ryan Poles, or even the biggest free agent signings of his general managering tenure at this point. But some of the key guys from this year's free agent class didn't have as big of an impact as you would like to see. If we want to start in the trenches, because we've got to get to the linebackers here too, but like DeMarcus Walker and Rasheem Green, right? They were your big answer to the hole on the defensive line, right? Where the Bears kind of said, okay, we're not going to overbid on Zach Allen and Javon Hargrave and some of the other big free agents that went for a huge amount of money. The Bears said, okay, we'll try and be more affordable, a little bit more smart with our investment here, spend less for guys that we think can make bigger impacts in DeMarcus Walker and Rasheem Green. Green, we at least saw struggle throughout the preseason, and so it wasn't as big of a surprise that he came into this game and did pretty much nothing as far as I can tell. I mean, I think he may have registered a tackle on the stat sheet. Actually, I think he was credited with an assisted tackle and a missed tackle by PFF in this game. really just not making any sort of positive impact, getting blown out in the running game, not getting much push in the pass rush at all. We saw him struggle in the preseason, and yet the Bears continue to insist he's valuable. We like him. We think he could be a big part of our defensive line. Still waiting to see it. And there's a reason why, too, that Dominic Robinson was getting a lot more of the pass rushing snaps than him, and ultimately I think I played just a couple fewer snaps than him, but still, like third downs, they would put DeMarcus Walker in a defensive tackle and bring Robinson on the outside with Ngakoue, and then Justin Jones. That was kind of their four-man passing down defensive line. And Walker himself didn't do a ton there. There was one play where he got to Jordan Love later in the game, and then Love just sidestepped him and scrambled and picked up a good handful of yards afterwards, where it was like he finally made a good pass rush on that play, but couldn't actually do anything with it. He missed a couple of tackles in the game. I thought he got washed out in the running game a few different times. And in pass pro, like it's good effort, it's good energy. You can see him doing a lot with his hands, his legs, trying to get around guys, but just couldn't get home consistently at all. And maybe you can call it a good Packers offensive line, but you need better from DeMarcus Walker. And he was kind of the initial answer for was going to be the solution here. And maybe, playing some defensive end and some defensive tackle, you thought they could get creative with him and get him in better matchups, but that just has not happened yet through the first game of the season. Still time for him to develop and grow in this defense. But like defensive line doesn't exactly get that excuse of like, oh, well, those guys haven't really played together before, because you're one-on-one pass rushing with an offensive lineman. Yes, your teammates matter when you do stunts and stuff. Like, sure, there's a teammate aspect to it, but a lot of this just comes down to you versus them. Who's better? Who's going to win more consistently? And Rasheem Green and DeMarcus Walker were absolutely not doing that. I'm also a little bit concerned just initially about Tremaine, Edmunds, and TJ Edwards. And throw Jack Sanborn in here for the Bears linebackers. But if we're talking about Ryan Poles' big acquisitions struggling in their first game. And this is a spot where, okay, first time in a regular season game, these two guys playing in this defense, playing together. They didn't play together a ton in the preseason, so there's going to be some learning and some growing here. But it sure felt like the communication at times was definitely still a work in progress. And this was clearly the Packers' game plan as well, to go after these Chicago Bears linebackers. If you look at the targets, and not only, of course, we talked about yesterday, Jordan Love really trying to hit that middle of the field, but specifically targeting these linebackers in coverage. Jordan Love threw 11 passes targeting Bears linebackers, 9 catches for 185 yards. That includes 51 of them on that play where the tight end Musgrave was wide open on the play action. That was Jack Sanborn's responsibility. He was supposed to stay with that and not run with that all the way down the field, or not get sucked up in the play action, but should have stayed with him, working all the way down the field. But still, TJ Edwards, 4 catches for 79 yards and a touchdown. The really bad one against Aaron Jones that went for a mile. Tremaine Edmunds gave up 4 catches for 55 yards, including a 30-yard play there, and he gave up 33 yards total after the catch. And then Sanborn had the big one too. Like, these guys were way too vulnerable in coverage for a guy, especially in Tremaine Edmunds, who part of the whole reason you brought him here was so that he would take away the middle of the field, right? I think we heard Justin Fields and other guys in the offseason talking about, yeah, it's tough when 49 is back there because he's so big and so fast. He can cover such a wide area that it's hard to throw against him. And yet, Jordan Love had plenty of success, not only throwing against him specifically, but just throwing to the middle of the field in general. And that was kind of supposed to be like the strength part of Tremaine Edmunds. That's where the concern comes from me. Like, I didn't think they were stellar in the running game either. Like, too often, when they're not as aggressive coming downhill and the block gets to them at the second level and they try and fight over the block and they like move backwards as the block comes to them, so they make the tackle 7 yards downfield. It's the same things we got frustrated with Roquan Smith about. But like, we knew that, particularly with Tremaine Edmunds, like, we knew run defense was not going to be a specialty, and he wasn't a massive, neither one was a massive liability in that regard. The defensive line needed to be a little bit better at the line of scrimmage there, but like, I'm not overly concerned about run defense, also because we kind of knew that part of their game was going to be part of this equation. They're not perfect linebackers by any means, but we thought maybe the coverage would be a little bit better there. We knew Edwards maybe lacking a little bit in speed, and then we saw that a couple times when he was trying to chase Aaron Jones. But man, you just thought maybe they could take away that area of the field a little bit more consistently, especially when the Bears were sitting in cover 2, cover 3, trying to have some space there. I know they got burned in man coverage a few times, unfortunately, too, but that's tough. You needed better from those guys here in particular. And kind of along with that, certainly the coaching staff could have done more to help the defensive line up front with the pass rush, linebackers in terms of maybe getting some different assignments involved there. I will say I was disappointed that Alan Williams and Matt Eberflus only blitzed 5 times in this game. It was 5 total plays with a blitz coming after him. One of them blitzed both. It was Kyler Gordon and Tremaine Edmunds blitz at the same time on one play, and then the other plays were just one-man blitzes. I actually think that Gordon blitz in the third or fourth quarter was the play he got injured on. You can't really see it on the play, but I think that was ultimately what happened there. So, you certainly can do more to help the linebackers, do more to help the defensive line. And again, it doesn't mean that all these signings are busts or that the trades were busts or anything like that. But it does mean, like, man, we thought they'd have instant impact, and they're not. And then the question is, how long will it take? How many games do you give these guys before you really start to wonder? Certainly one game is not enough. But, do you expect them to be perfect by week 2? Probably not. So then they need to be 100% like locked in by week 4, week 6? But at some point you start to be enough of a way into the season where if you're losing football games, it's hard to dig back out from that because you're waiting for your acquisitions to play up to the level that you expected when you signed them. But I think at the very least, it's a good lesson for us and for Ryan Poles to say, okay, you don't want to be reliant on free agency. They've said they don't want to all along, but we can't expect free agents to come in and just be instant like upgrades, instant defense, instant offense. I mean, same for DJ Moore. And no one's here to blame DJ Moore for only having 2 catches, but we thought DJ Moore would come in and be 100 yards in his first game, right? And it doesn't always work that way. And I think it's kind of a lesson for future years too, that, hey, just because you get excited about all these new pieces and all these new toys, they're not going to be ready to go and not going to be 100% in week 1, especially when they're either injured or just not practicing or not playing in preseason games, whether it's by coach's choice or by injury. So yes, it's easy to get down on some of Ryan Poles' biggest moves, but I think the encouraging thing is that when you look across the board at the rookies, and not even the rookies and second-year players, the players Ryan Poles has used draft picks on, has scouted, that are a reflection of his ability to evaluate talent, those guys have been encouraging. We talked about a couple of players on yesterday's podcast, but having been able to go back through the game now on a second watch a lot slower, I think we got a little bit more we can break down here beyond the guys we talked about yesterday and kind of give a broader picture at like encouraging signs from this Bears rookie draft class and second-year draft class as well. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the better way to do daily fantasy sports. If you've never done daily fantasy, or maybe you've tried it on other platforms before, you got to check out PrizePicks. It's a little bit different and a lot more fun, and you can win up to 25 times your money throughout the football season. You pick 2 to 6 players and their PrizePicks projections, right? They'll set a number. They've got it right now, for example, in week 2, Jordan Love, they've got his projection at 174.5 passing yards. So you pick, will he go higher or lower than 174.5 passing yards? You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they'll go higher or lower than their PrizePicks projection, and then boom, you can win, like I said, up to 25 times your money. You can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. And they now offer Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account all football season long. You got to check it out. It's a lot of fun. And they've got not only Bears players, of course, but across the league and across other sports as well. Head on over to prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl and use our code LOCKEDONNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's up to $100 matching on your first deposit at prizepicks.com/lockedonnfl. Promo code LOCKEDONNFL. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Well, it wasn't easy to like what we saw from a lot of the Bears free agents and honestly the trade acquisitions, like a Chase Claypool or even a little disappointment from DJ Moore's overall production. The draft picks that Ryan Poles has made are showing good progress based on expectations for them. Obviously, Velus Jones, out of the separate conversation, not playing this game, obviously a big disappointment. But the draft picks that were on the field were encouraging. I thought Darnell Wright, for example, was by no means amazing. Got beat by Rasheem Gary a few different times. But for the most part, that was at the very least meeting expectations. We don't have to say exceeding expectations, but he wasn't awful. He made some mistakes. He made some nice plays in the running game as well, I thought. Sure, a couple of times here and there in pass protection, he was beat on the outside a little bit too easily, but I think he's getting used to the speed of somebody like Rasheem Gary the first time going up against some of these pass rushers. Sure, with all the rookies especially, you kind of go in with maybe a slightly lower bar because it's their first NFL game, as opposed to like the veteran free agent signing who you don't have the excuse, oh, he didn't know how fast everyone would be. No, he maybe didn't know the defense or the scheme or his teammates as good as you want, but like, Jordan Love's not doing anything he's never seen before. But whereas Darnold Wright, okay, pass rushers are attacking him in some different ways. And, he learned, and I think he got better as the game went on, and certainly moved some guys in the running game pretty well. Didn't get much help from Nate Davis at right guard. I think that made Darnold Wright look worse in a few different spots. Of course, I think he had a false start on the 2-point conversion play, if I remember correctly. So there were warts, there were mistakes, but we expected some warts and some mistakes and some raw play from Darnold Wright. But I don't think, if I'm trying to assign offensive line blame, I think I'm still starting with Lucas Patrick, Cody Whitehair, and Nate Davis first. And then we can talk about Wright versus Braxton Jones. Not to say that either one of them was great, but in terms of the problems up front, those guys were a little bit lower down the priority list for me in terms of things that you were really, really concerned about. How about Zach Pickens on the defensive line? Not a huge impact over the course of the game. Didn't play a ton. He played 12 snaps out of 60, but had a big play in the backfield, some good penetration at the goal line, being disruptive in the running game, making an impact in a very small sample size. I thought that was encouraging from him. Gervon Dexter didn't really do much for me. I'm not here to say he was great by any means, but I wasn't like disappointed. We knew with both these defensive tackles, raw prospects that are going to take time. So like, I didn't think he was like totally blown out of the water and didn't belong out there, but just, yeah, he's a backup defensive tackle. That's about where he is right now. Tyreek Stevenson made some really nice tackles after the catch, really nice tackle for loss in the running game. Didn't really see him get burned. Like in the preseason, there were a couple times where he just got lost or just lost track of somebody, and it was like a big mistake where you're like, oh man, rookie mistake. You got beat in the end zone on that jump ball, but it was a really nice ball, really tough play to defend. He was right there, had a hand up and everything, just couldn't. It was like better throw, good coverage, better throw kind of thing. So I thought Stevenson checked the boxes for me too. I didn't come away concerned at all from Stevenson. If anything, he got his feet wet a little bit here and got involved and had some energy out there. I was quite satisfied with what we saw from Stevenson. We talked on yesterday's podcast about Roschon Johnson looking great. Tyler Scott, I thought more involved than I thought he would be in the offense. It was 2 catches, but that was still the same number as DJ Moore. Like, I don't know, he did a couple things here and there and was involved on special teams as well as the kickoff return guy. So, like rookie class there, pretty good. Like, solid contributions. Guys trending in the right direction. No one looking like totally lost, totally in over their head. You're worried about how he's going to adapt to the NFL. Like, no, they all seem to kind of find their footing and have a place there. But the second-year guys, too. Kyler Gordon picked up right where he left off in the preseason. Had a nice pass breakup. Of course, got hurt. We haven't gotten an official update on his injury, but reading between the lines, sort of between the grapevine, I never want to say too much and give away too much, but it sounds like there's some concern there about Kyler. That's all I'll say. It sounds like there's some concern there about Kyler Gordon's status here. Like, not necessarily like season-ending per se, but like, I don't know if Kyler Gordon's going to play in week 2. We'll see. Nothing's official or anything yet, but I think expect some more Josh Blackwell this week is kind of the inkling that I'm getting, working some channels there. Anyway, concerned about Kyler Gordon's injury, but not concerned about the level of play that we saw from him on the field in this game. I thought, stepped up and it looked to be ascending at this point. Jaquan Brisker, I didn't see anything bad. Didn't see anything special either. I don't think he didn't make any like humongous big hits. No real like pass breakups, was targeted a couple times, didn't give up any big catches. Made a couple nice plays in the running game, but sometimes got blocked out of plays too. Didn't really miss any tackles. Like he was solid. Like sure, he was fine. Not bad, not great. Sure, that's fine. He was a solid starting safety. That's great for a 2nd round pick. Sure. And then Velus Jones didn't play. Healthy scratch. Not good. But I'm talking about guys that were on the field. Braxton Jones. Okay. Not all the Ryan Poles draft picks were great, right? Like the 3 penalties, right? 2 holdings and a false start. I think not great. And I don't want to be that like, well, outside of the penalties, he was good guy because the penalties were big, right? Of course, like that absolutely shapes his performance. Like those 3 plays were so catastrophic that it's not like you can just outweigh them with the rest of his plays. But like outside of those 3 penalties, like the actual, like when he followed the rules on plays, it wasn't bad. Wasn't great. Didn't seem like he was like markedly better than last year. I know one of the Locked On Bears insiders was asking about Braxton Jones a couple weeks ago. Like, I wasn't seeing like progress per se, but I wasn't seeing like regression. I guess regression, not backward. Wasn't going backwards. It wasn't worse, except for sort of the penalties and the focus in that regard. Like he's still kind of gives up too much ground, but is pretty good at anchoring. And so like he gets driven back into Fields, but not always beaten. And sometimes he can throw Fields off a little bit. So it's not like he's not losing his pass rush, but he's not doing a great job at it sometimes in that regard. So like he's still a work in progress, but it wasn't a disaster from Braxton Jones, certainly compared to, the other guys on the offensive line. Certainly getting on some screenplays, he struggled, and the penalties for sure too. But for the most part, I was, dare I say, okay with what Braxton Jones did outside of the penalties, which then add in the penalties. I was not okay with what Braxton Jones did. But right, if we're trying to look at like, if we assume the penalties thing can just be cleaned up by next week, and then all you're left with is what we saw in the other 50 plays or whatever, not terrible, not the end of the road there. So like, there's signs there from Ryan Poles' draft picks here that like maybe they can get to do some stuff. Maybe they're growing, and certainly the expectation is lower. So when they don't play, like compared to the free agent signings where the expectation's higher, you're more disappointed when they don't play well, as opposed to the rookies. You're more looking for signs of positivity as opposed to looking for signs of struggles, because the struggles are going to be there. So maybe it's not a fair bar, but I do think if we're going to be critical of Ryan Poles' trades and free agents, we can also be fair to his draft picks as well and give him credit for where those guys are starting to look the part more and more with more experience. We'll keep tabs on all these players all throughout the rest of the season, however they do in week 2 and beyond. So be sure then to get those updates on the podcast by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts or on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we love our everydayers that tune in 5 days a week to get your daily Bears fix and to get your daily opportunity to bear down.